Can you all hear me down there? I feel kind of disconnected from everybody. We have this big space to dance for between us. So, yeah. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good? All right. Well, thank you for having me come speak to you today. I'll try to make this as painless as possible. I do have a lot of stuff to go through, but I'm going to make it a little bit speedier, I'm going to kind of glaze over it. So again, just trying to get you the ideas of what's going on. I get to follow Pete, and Pete's a guy that's hanging out with the director, who's kind of the head guy who oversees what our department does with pesticides. And so he's a really he'd be a great resource to talk about what's happening with chlorpyrifos. Marcia kind of asked me to give you kind of an update on that. And as I was working on this the last couple of days, as you go through the US EPA website, it's pretty difficult to move through and get exact information. So at the county level, we deal a lot with our state partners, the DPR, who are really good at giving us information and timelines on when things are going to happen. Sometimes they don't always get to at the time that they think they're going to get to, but they're really good at keeping us updated and letting us know. So I'm going to do my best to kind of give you a quick little lowdown on chlorpyrifos. It's only a couple of slides. Just kind of a background of what happened with it, what I was able to pull out from the US EPA dockets and all that stuff. So the other things I'm going to be talking about, besides kind of the US EPA actions, I'm going to review our permit conditions, and then I'm just going to give you one slide to just kind of remind you about the bees with chlorpyrifos, and I'm going to talk about the VOCs. I am going to talk about some new regulations that are coming out. We expect them out next week, so these have been pushed back quite a few months. But I've heard that next week we are going to get these for sure. And I was actually planning to give you the exact regulations when I came today, but unfortunately they're not out yet, so I don't really know. But I do want to give you some background in it and get you prepared. So if you guys want to make some comments to the DPR, which is really valuable to do, a great thing to do, that you know that these are out there, and it's going to be the time to comment pretty quickly. So, and then I'm just going to really quick over one of the main packages, regulation packages that has come out for the DPR about the new worker protection standards, and what those changes mean to California. They're not too bad, because in California a lot of those regulations, national regulations, are based on what we do here in California. So all the other states are really behind the curve on those. So with the update, this is kind of the stuff I was able to pull out from the history. And on the US EPA website, it doesn't really flow really good, so you gotta bounce around. And again, Pete would be an excellent source to talk to about what's going on with chlorpyrifos. I'm not even sure if I interpreted all this right, but way back in 2007, the Pesticide Action Network and the National Resource Defense Council, they petitioned US EPA to revoke the tolerances of chlorpyrifos. So that was way back in 2007. Kind of as a response to that, the US EPA started to develop new evaluation methods and procedures to address those concerns, and they had been moving along. They actually were able to address 7 out of 10 of those were addressed by denying the petition, or they were able to make changes with the labels. And I'm sure you guys have seen those have been going on for a long period of time with chlorpyrifos. So, as part of a normal kind of a registration review with chlorpyrifos, in 2014 a risk assessment was completed. That risk assessment showed that workers who make slow and apply, it showed some risk to them. The risk of residues from dietary and residential exposures appeared safe separately, but in this risk assessment they could not conclude that aggregate residues of dietary and residential residues, when combined with estimated drinking water residues in small heavily formed water systems, appeared to be safe. So you kind of heard Pete talking about some of the areas that we're not really sure where they're at, that these aggregate residue levels, US EPA felt they were too high. In June 2015, because of an administrative petition dealing with the timeliness of the decision, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court ordered the US EPA to deny the original petition or issue a decision. So kind of when the US EPA deals with these, they have three choices. They can do a final decision, which that means that's it. They can do a proposed decision, which is, it's from what I'm getting from it, it's more like a temporary decision pending more information. And then or they can deny the petition, which means that the decision is against the petitioner. So in June 30th, 2015, the EPA informed the court that based on the results of its water assessment, EPA intends to propose by April 15, 2016, which is past already, the revocation of all chlorpyrifos tolerances in the absence of pesticide label mitigation that ensures that drinking water exposures will be safe. So as Pete said, that decision will be moved back. And I heard 2006, the end of 2016, pending that there was some progress reports to the court, and so I think what Pete mentioned, he's got more accurate information than I do. So what does all this mean? As far as I can tell, the use continues as now, as you guys know that. That lack of that complete drinking water data prevents the US EPA from making that final decision. The US EPA has left this door open for possible continued use in certain crops, or use possible within less vulnerable watershed areas. And again, I thought the final decision was supposed to be at the end of this year. The US EPA has asked for more time, as Pete said. So what I wanted to do is I asked one of our manufacturer representatives, Dow, I wanted to ask them what kind of information they had, what they were getting. And I guess they've been sending out some letters and some information. And so what they're saying is they're pretty confident that the use will continue through 2017. And I don't know if they're thinking if there's a final decision made. Typically, you get a grace period to remove all the product from the channels of trade. So you have that opportunity to use the product that's out there. In some cases, they don't do that. They just do it immediately. But I think that's what kind of Dow is talking about here. So they're pretty confident that even if the decision went against chlorpyrifos, they would still have, you guys still would have some time to use the product up. So that's kind of my gloss over of what's going on with chlorpyrifos at the US EPA level. Again, we kind of rely on the state. They kind of act as the go-between for us, and they work extensively with the US EPA, and that's where we get a lot of our information. So again, Pete would be a really good source since he was actually out there talking with the US EPA director. So, but just to know that more recent action, so as I was looking up information yesterday, I got an article that came across from Washington, and this is kind of the headlines. It looks like the US EPA was petitioned from some other groups, the United Farm Workers and some other labor and community health groups, and in a separate petition, they petitioned the EPA to immediately suspend hundreds of uses of chlorpyrifos. And so that's one new thing. And of course, with chlorpyrifos, you hear about all the things that are happening with the aquatic, getting in waterways. The water coalitions are doing a fantastic job of educating growers and going out and talking to people and pinpointing where these are coming from, but they're still happening. So unfortunately, as these keep happening, I mean, you're just, it's adding more fuel to the fire for this. And so to me, things don't look very good for chlorpyrifos. So I don't think that's a shocker to you. So one thing Pete was talking about, I'm going to skip into the permit conditions really quick here, but so one thing I wanted to do with you guys was to review our permit conditions here in Merced County. So these have been out for just over a year. They were introduced by the DPR. These are called, DPR puts out recommended permit conditions to the counties, and most of the counties actually adopted these the way they were. So back in July 2015, DPR made chlorpyrifos because of a lot of the concerns. They made it a restricted material. And the reason for that was because of the surface water issues with all the detections in the waterways. And then the bystander exposure. So Gprs air monitoring network, I know they were picking up a lot of chlorpyrifos in some of their stations, like 66, over 50% of the time they were getting these chlorpyrifos residues in their air monitoring network, and so they wanted to address bystander safety with that too. So as a restricted material, of course, it requires a notice of intent, and it can be conditioned, and that's where these conditions, that's what happened with these conditions. So as a restricted material, you have permit conditions. At the end of June, in Merced County, we sent out about 150 letters to past users within the past 5 years, just to kind of letting them know that we were going to be issuing these permit conditions. By December, again, that's kind of some old information. By December of 2016, they intend to revoke the tolerances, and then they're waiting for that drinking water data. So I just want to kind of move through just the basic parts of the permit conditions. So what we have with these permit conditions are setback distances. These setback distances, you can kind of call them buffer zones, but typically with buffer zones, they're usually in effect for a period of time. With these setback distances, it's just only when in effect during the application time. So they require minimum distance when adjacent, and when applied to adjacent sensitive sites. And really big thing that we're focusing on is aquatic sites, but of course a sensitive site could be anything. Obviously a school would be a very sensitive site. Homes. We would also consider maybe a roadway too. So if you're applying chlorpyrifos and it's on a busy roadway, we would consider a busy roadway a sensitive site. Obviously, because if you have people moving through there, you don't want to have any overspray or drift onto any of those vehicles. The setbacks, for those adjacent to sensitive sites for ground boom, it would be 25 feet. For chemigation, 25 feet. For air blast, it would be 50 feet. And for aerial, it would be 150 feet. And then you'll notice that for the air blast, there is a section, it notes 6960, which is the dormancies and applications to trees and vines. And that's another regulation actually that came in effect because of chlorpyrifos being found in waterways. So people nowadays, they don't do a lot of dormant spraying with chlorpyrifos. Back then it was kind of, we had this old system where it's kind of a regimented routine where they would just do what they've always done. And things are a lot better nowadays. But that 6960 dormant insecticide completion, so it has some restrictions on when you can spray before major storm events, how saturated the soil is, you have to get a recommendation, things like that. But that's, again, we're talking about alfalfa here, so we're not talking about dormancy, right? But I just wanted you to know that as you were looking at the permit conditions, what that dealt with. So for the setback areas, they extend from the edge of the treated area in all directions. So no one's allowed in those setback areas unless okayed by the commissioner. And again, we pretty much expect nobody to be in those setback areas all the time. We might approve it, but you would have to get that approval from us. If you turn in an NOI and there's people moving through your setback area, we come out there and we do an inspection on that. We're going to say that you're not following the permit conditions if there's people moving through those setback areas, unless we okay it. So make sure if you have something going on and you think it's going to be okay for those people to go through those setback areas, and you want to get the okay from us. So.
Hey, Sean.
Yes?
Is there any attempt to differentiate rotary versus aerial or fixed wing? Helicopter, airplane?
No, yeah, we haven't done that. So, and again, these were recommended permit conditions that were issued by the state, and pretty much all the counties adopted them as they were. They didn't make any changes to them. So that would have been nice if they had that. So because we all kind of realize that helicopters do a much better job of placing the material on site. So. So talking about the wind restrictions for air blast applications, or actually wind restrictions You can only make these applications when the wind is between 3 and 10 miles an hour. So that kind of goes with what the labels particularly say. You don't want to do applications when it's calm. That's a good time for it to drift if you get wrapped up in inversion layers. So you want a little bit of wind movement. You want to kind of know where it's going. And then, of course, you don't want it going too strong. For the air blast applications to orchards, they have to spray inwards towards the orchard from the outside with the outside nozzle shut off. You would be amazed that we occasionally catch people not doing that. And then, of course, the top nozzle shut off when spraying small trees. And then the last on there is for granules that you have to clean up any spilled granules during loading to prevent surface water contamination. Again, as I knew I was coming here, I did want to give kudos to Pete. I read his report, and it had some great information in there, so I encourage all of you to go check it out. It just has a great general overview information about alfalfa. So I was actually very interested in reading it, so it was good. But I did pull some stuff out of there. He did have a nice graph of the typical historical use of when chlorpyrifos is used, and of course you can see it February, March, and April on the high points, and then in July and August, and like Pete was saying for the worms, probably that's going on there. And so I wanted to point out that, especially that February, March, April, because that's always a specific concern to us with the bees in the area. So especially more on the east side where we have more trees over there. So we have these areas where the alfalfa is adjacent to the trees, and we're always concerned about that, obviously. So it used to be furadan we used to really worry about, and now it's just about everything. So I did want to mention that, and I'm glad that Pete brought up the decision-making tool. That's something that we use. We've saw that came out, and so I've distributed it to our staff. And we do use documents like that when we're reviewing the notices of intent. They're great sources of information. So our staff does look through that when they're doing that. So, and I encourage all of you to use that too. So again, with the notification of beekeepers, if you're using a material that's toxic to bees, for our department, what you have to do is you have to inquire to us, beekeepers within a mile of the application to blossoming plants. And when I say blossoming plants, that doesn't just mean the plant that you're spraying. It means any weeds that are in the alfalfa too. So most of the time, as I've been out doing NOIs, you'll definitely see some other blooming plants in the weeds, and depending on where the alfalfa's at. So of course, this is for blossoming plants. So if you have a super clean alfalfa field, then you wouldn't have to do this, but you need to get in there and look for chickweed and all those other very small plants that are underneath the alfalfa. So what happens when you give us a call, and we'll give you the name of the beekeeper, and then your job is to notify the beekeeper 48 hours in advance to let them know prior to the application. And of course, with that, you must always comply with the pesticide labels. So even if you give the beekeeper the 48 hours, it doesn't mean that you're free to spray do whatever you want. You still have to follow what the label says. So if we went out and investigated a bee kill, and you did do the notification, but you sprayed in the daytime, or you didn't take into account what the label says, and that would be a violation. So. And I did want to say, in Pete's report, he does have a nice checklist of best management practices. And I kind of, as I was looking through this, I was checking off all the green squares on there. Pete calls them best management practices, but there's actually regulatory effect behind a lot of these. So a lot of these are really mandatory practices that you have to do. So if you haven't seen this report, go on there. That's a great checklist when you're making applications to alfalfa. So it's got a lot of stuff about irrigation and things. And that's something that we do see a lot, is when we go out and do notices of intent. We don't see the timing between applicators and growers at the right stages. So sometimes they'll be irrigating, at the time when they think something's going to happen, and so we'll have to deny a lot of those NOIs at certain times. So, really quick, I want to talk about VOC regulations. I don't have any updated information as far as the use report inventory, and what that tells us is where these regulations are taking us in the next couple of years. Usually they come out in about October. The DPR kind of lets us know that I think what they would be working on, since it's 2016, they would be working on the 2014 data inventory, and they would be able to tell us if that was below the threshold or above the threshold. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, what's going on is 2015 is the first of 2 years of restrictions on using high VOC pesticides from May 1st through October 31st, containing chlorpyrifos, abamectin, oxyfluorphane, and gibberellins. And that's using it on alfalfa, also on cotton, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, grapes, and citrus. The 2014 pesticide inventory was the last one that I got back, and that one was clear. So as long as, if the next one's clear, we'll be good. We'll just have to follow through with 2000 this year, and then we'll be done with the restrictions. Next year, there won't be the restrictions on the high VOCs that there are now. So again, the restrictions that are in effect right now are from the 2013 exceedance of the SIP goal. And again, the reason why we're dealing with 2013 is there's pretty much a 2-year lag on the use reports. For us to get them entered, for them to get to DPR, for them to analyze everything. So it's definitely not a perfect system, but it's about the best system that we have right now to try to lower these VOCs. So again, looking back at some of the historical data, so that 2013 usage actually hit that purple line, which is the goal, and hit the trigger level, and that's what caused us to have those restrictions that are in effect this year. Remember when you're talking about VOCs that there is no restrictions for using the low VOC versions of those materials. Again, Lorispan, some examples of that would be Lorispan Advanced, Goaltender, Agromec SC. And then what we're talking about with the low VOCs and the high VOCs is the DPRs come up with thresholds, VOC emission potential thresholds. And for abamectin, it's 35%, chlorpyrifos is 25%, gibberellins is 25%, and oxyfluorphane is 15%. And so you can see the differences between the high VOC products and the low VOC products. A couple days ago, I was just running a use report check, and it looks like Merced County's doing a very good job, at least with the reports that we've received. I haven't seen, I spent quite a while looking at them just to see if I could find some people that weren't following the regulations, but it looks like everybody's doing a good job. So. And again, this particular graph has the 2014 data, and as I was saying on the previous slide, that one didn't hit. So right now we're waiting for the 2015 data to see what happens with that. The one thing that we are seeing, though, that we want to be careful is that they designed those regulations around the 4 highest VOC products that are being used and the potentials involved with those. But we're starting to see a couple of other materials creep into this top 4 list. And the real problem, the kind of problem with that is we don't want to see them take over those top spots, because DPR will have to reevaluate their regulations, and they might include more of these products into these regulations. So we want to try to use the products, the low VOC products during those years, even if we're not under restriction, so we don't come up against these kind of problems. There's just a quick list of chlorpyrifos, and talking about chlorpyrifos. These are all the low VOC products for chlorpyrifos, so there's definitely quite a few to choose from. Really quick, I want to give you kind of an introduction of the pesticide use near schools. And this is a regulation that, again, I said we're waiting for it next week, and it's I think you guys are going to next week. You're really going to hear about it in the papers. It's somewhat controversial. ever since I've been working for the Ag Department, there's always been a history to create legislation to enact buffer zones or no spray zones around schools. So, especially in 2014, there was a renewed interest in schools in determining if there was any exposure to pesticides at the schools. And the California Department of Public Health put out a report back in 2014 under their electronic surveillance program. And what they were doing, they said they were looking for better ways to correlate use report data with exposure potential to children in schools. So they came out with this report. One thing the Ag Commissioners commented on was that it dealt with a lot of poor data. So use reports aren't really designed to predict exposure to schools. They just kind of give a general area of where these use reports are, and they're not, at that time they weren't really correlated with GPS coordinates and things like that. So they're somewhat inaccurate when you use them for this purpose. This report also didn't take into account the timing and application. So here in Merced, we do fumigant, a lot of fumigant in the sweet potatoes. This report didn't take into account in that. So if you actually do one application within a quarter mile of a school, you're putting thousands of pounds of fumigant into the ground. And so what that makes us look like here in Merced is we have thousands of pounds of pesticides applied around the school. But they don't take into account the fact that we did it on Christmas, or we did it on Easter break, or some other time. Or we actually talked to the school district and they decided to rearrange their vacation schedule for the grower, which was an amazing thing. We were able to do that for one of our growers out in the Livingston area, and the school district was amazing. They worked with us and they were able to do that. So they were able to arrange a couple programs. But so there was all this activity with this new report, and a lot of groups grabbed onto this report, and they used it to to fuel their campaigns to go back to this creating legislation to enact these buffer zones, and not really taking into the science. Is there really exposure happening at these schools? So the DPR, they decided they were going to act on this, and one thing I would like you to do, if you don't do anything today, or if you don't remember anything, try to remember this. When you go home today, or even on your phone, look up on the DPR website, go to the quick links page on the top, and then there's another one called regulations. And then if you go down below it, there's one that says regulations under development. Check out that website. And what you'll do is you'll get this big page of information, and this is all information about the schools, this regulation package that's coming out. It has a whole bunch of stuff on there. It has a document that kind of describes what DPR is trying to do with this, and that document is called Concepts to Address Pesticide Use in Your Schools. And so I pulled out one of the key statements in there, and it says DPR has gathered input on new requirements on pesticide use in your schools. DPR recognizes and intends to address the need for consistent statewide requirements that pertain to agricultural pesticide applications in your schools. Some of the ways they intend to do this: increase communication through notification to schools. So they want some sort of a notification system between the schools and the applicators, and possibly our department. I'm still kind of waiting to hear what's going to happen with that. So of the intended applications of certain pesticides made when the school is in session and within a certain proximity of the school. They're also looking for a reduced risk of exposure by additional restrictions on applications of certain pesticides, again, made using specific application methods. So they're really going to look at certain application methods and within a certain proximity to the school. So this is kind of the timeline of what they were expecting to do. They had some regional workshops back in 2015, and then there was some a comment period on it. In December 2015, they were developing the draft regulations. They were supposed to be out in February, but they ran into some additional analysis that they need to do, cost analysis, how much was this going to cost growers, applicators, and the ag commissioners to fund, regulating these new regulations. So we're supposed to get those next week, and so that's what I really want to tell you. Look for these. If you live near a school, or even if you want to comment on it, I would suggest you comment on it. I wanted to show you some of the comments that were going on with some of these. So this is what the DPR has posted on their website. So a lot of this information is comments, and it's really interesting to go on to read other people's perspective of what they're trying to accomplish and the reasons why they're trying to do it. So they had some letters from school administrators and other agencies. There's a total of 3 comments from them, 2 schools. One was against the involvement in the notification process. One was for buffer zones. There's a public health department in favor of 1/4 to a half-mile buffer zones around schools. So there was letters from organizations, 142 pages of letters. Most of them are 2 or 3 pages. I ended up reading through a lot of them. A lot of unions, advocacy groups, environmental groups were the vast majority of those. And they all kind of have a plan. And their plan is a 1-mile protection zone, notification, and air monitoring around schools. So there was a lot of your agricultural groups did send in letters. The Merced Farm Bureau was one of them. They piggybacked with a lot of other farm bureaus, and they were urging them to look at science. And they also they urged them to look at the history of exposures at schools, and that was something we did at the commissioner levels to comment on the Department of Public Health's report. We actually went through all the counties here in the valley. We got together all of our reports from schools, and we had very little. There was very few, and they found out, that's what they found out through the state, that there was very little exposure happening at schools as far as the investigation records were showing. So it's complaints and people coming, people talking about that. So there was a lot of other letters. So there's 120 unique letters, and by unique letters I mean people actually sat down and wrote a letter and put their thoughts down. There's 2,617 form letters, which were kind of just, somebody pretty much gave them the body of the letter and they signed their name to it. All of these form letters were requesting 1-mile protection zones around schools. The majority were requesting these 1-mile protection zones, notification, and air monitoring too, also with that. So, along in the DPR website, there is too. There's some presentations from one of the workshops, so you can actually watch that and see some of the discussion and what people are saying about it. And it's interesting. There's a lot of good discussion, and some people are just loosely correlating illnesses and asthma and all kinds of things with pesticide spraying. So they're coming at it from a lot of different ways. But again, the majority of it is people that are looking for those 1-mile protection zones. So what's to come for this? Well, I think there's definitely going to be notification zones, and how that works I have yet to hear. I'm going to probably hear about it next week. Restrictions on when you can spray, time frame hours before and after school, restriction on where you can spray, 500-foot buffer zones, 1,000 for aerial applications. I'm not really sure. 1/4 to half-mile protection zones. I don't know what's going to come out of this. So. It's supposed to be in place by April 2017. This little photograph right here is just from our permit system. And you can see that happens to be a school. That's the El Nido school right there, out in El Nido. And you can see how many properties a 1-mile zone encompasses around that. So, and here's just a little thing in Merced County, and there's your 1-mile protection zones around all the schools in Merced County. So I always look at this picture and I think of bad case of measles. So, my encouragement to you is this is a one-sided story to me. When I read all those letters, it's really the vast majority is people wanting these 1-mile protection zones. I don't see a lot of people looking at actual exposures, what's happening at the schools. So look for the comment period this month. Please submit comments. We need your comments. Agriculture needs your comments to come to the right decision on these. Let DPR know your issues with the regulators. They don't know until you tell them. So, and I've always found DPRs, they're actually very good at listening. So a lot of times they'll make a regulation, and the reason why it seems skewed is because nobody's commented on it. Nobody's given their input on it. So don't let people without the knowledge make the decision for you. So really quick, I'm going to try to, how am I doing on time here?
You're okay.
Okay. I'm going to try to breeze through this. This stuff is not really that in depth. So back in November of last year, there's some news segments on the TV, and then people started asking all these questions. Hey, I heard about all these new regulations that California's going to be doing, and that was actually a newscast or some media got a hold of the fact that the U.S. EPA was updating the federal worker protection standards. They don't realize that in California, again, that we are doing a lot of this stuff. And for us in California, it's only minor tweaks. For the rest of the country, they're going to be actually catching up to what we're doing here in California. So these will be implemented at the start of 2017 and 2018. So we're going to go through that really quick. I'm going to skip that slide. But we're going to start out with pesticide safety training for workers and handlers. So what the EPA's current rule, or the worker protection standard now, is that employers are required to ensure that workers and handlers are trained once every 5 years. And the key thing to that is to look at workers and handlers. So their revised rule will be workers and handlers must be trained annually. So here in California, handlers, we already require the handlers to be trained annually. The one thing we do is we only require the field workers to be trained once every 5 years. So we will have to bump that up a little bit, but I don't really see that as too big of a deal for most growers. Again, it's just kind of when they train their handlers, they would train their field workers also too. So for the farm labor contractors, it might be a little bit more work, but again, they're doing a lot of training out in the field anyways, most farm labor contractors. For established record-keeping requirements to verify training, so the current rule for the rest of the country is no requirement for how an employer must verify a worker or handler has received pesticide safety training. So they're going to revise it that the employer must maintain records of worker and handler training for 2 years. Here in California, for the handlers, you guys already do that. Our office has always recommended that you do it with the field workers too. But that will now become a part of the regulations. So the handler training records, you'll have to keep a record on the handlers, and then you'll have to keep that for 2 years. So for expanded content of training, so EPA's current rule requires employees to train handlers and workers on specific topics. The revised rule is going to add some additional topics, which are mostly topics that are involved in these trainings, which are reducing take-home exposure, inclusion zones, minimum age, respiratory use. Those are all new things, part of this package. And so what we're going to have to do here in California is we're going to have to incorporate some of these new requirements that the U.S. EPA is into our required training topics. So it's just going to be, again, that's a kind of a minor tweak. We're just going to have to add some sentences, maybe an extra requirement or two. Right now we have 16, so maybe 17 or 18. So that's not a big, huge change for any of us here. For the notification changes, field posting. So currently it requires employees to notify workers orally or by posting warning signs for fields that are under REI if the worker is in a quarter mile of the treated site. For the revised rule, it will require posting for all outdoor applications with REIs greater than 48 hours. So here in California, we only require that if it's over 7 days. So again, it's a little bit of a tweak. The time frame, it's going to be 48 hours instead of 7 days. So for hazard communication, the EPA's current rule requires employees to provide pesticide-specific application information at the central display. The revised rule requires employees to provide pesticide-specific hazard information at the central display as well as the application information. For you guys here in California, we already require the SDSs to be maintained, but now the SDSs are going to be required to be available at a central display. And the key word there is available. When it's available, it has to be accessible by the employees. They can have access to it. So now we have SDS sheets you can have them in a file and give them out when they're requested. But this will you'll have to make these available to the employee. So. For the hazard information availability, the current rule, pesticide records must be maintained and posted at a central website for 30 days plus the REI. The revised rule will be the application and hazard information must be maintained for 2 years and be made available to workers, medical personnel, and designated representatives if requested. So, California already requires record keeping for 2 years. California must add EPA requirements for records to be provided to designated representatives upon request. For drift-related requirements, the current rule, we're going to talk about these entry-restricted areas now. They're adjacent to treated areas during pesticide application for nurseries and greenhouses. So EPA's proposed rule retains nursery and greenhouse requirements, but changes the term entry-restricted area to exclusion zone and requires new exclusion zones for up to 100 feet around application equipment for outdoor production. So the Impact California will have to require these new exclusion zones for this 100-foot exclusion zone around application equipment for outdoor applications. So, there's a minimum age requirement, so EPA is putting that now for it will now require all entry workers and handlers to be at least 18 years old. California will require and revise our current handler age requirements to apply to all handling situations and adopt early entry worker age requirements. The display of safety records, the current rule requires pesticide safety posters to be displayed at a central location. For us in California, we call those the PSIS series sheets. So the revised rule will require pesticide safety information to be displayed at a central location and all decontamination sites servicing 11 or more workers. So that'll be a new requirement for us here in California. Again, you keep those PSIS sheets at your central place. You'll now have to have, if you have 11 or more people out there, you'll have to keep them at the decontamination site. For decontamination, requires employees to provide enough. The current rule requires employees to provide enough water for routine washing and emergency eye flushing. The revised rule will require employees to provide 1 gallon of water per worker and 3 gallons of water per handler. Early entry workers for decontamination. So in California, we'll have to actually put that in regulation. We never had the exact amounts specified. That was always kind of a recommendation for us when we were out doing inspections of how much water is enough. So now we always looked at the Worker Protection Center to kind of provide that for us, but now it's actually going to be in the regulations, the California regulations. So. For decontamination, eye decontamination, it requires all handlers applying pesticides that require protective eyewear to have 1 pint of eye wash immediately available. So their revised rule will say they must provide water at all mixing and loading sites for eye decontamination when label requires protective eyewear, or when using a closed system for a system capable of delivering 4.4 gallons a minute for 15 minutes, or from 6 gallons of water able to flow gently for about 15 minutes. And it does still retain the 1 pint rule to be immediately available. So again, this is probably one of the bigger changes for us, getting these decontamination facilities that would provide enough water. And there's actually some specifications now for how much water you have to provide for that eye decontamination. Some exemptions. So there are some. The current rule exempts employers from complying with certain handler re-entry worker requirements for workers performing crop advising tasks if they are certified crop advisors or directly supervised by one. EPA's rule eliminates this exemption for employers directly supervised by certified crop advisors. And for California, we must delete these exemptions also. So currently we have some exemptions for your field scouts that go out there and do this, depending on the communication that goes on between the PCA and the scouts. So these exemptions are now going to be taken away. So exemptions that apply in an enclosed cab. So permanent handlers to forego respiratory protection requirements of operating in an enclosed cab approved for respiratory protection. So this the new rule will require handlers in enclosed cabs to wear the label specified respiratory protection, except when the only label specified respiratory protection is a filtering face piece respirator. The impact in California, so we must delete this exemption as well. And this doesn't really affect us that much because we don't really consider any cabs to be certified for respiratory protection anyways. If you talk to the manufacturers and ask them, is your cab, can an employee sit in your cab and not use a respirator when applying Telone or when disking Telone? They would say, well, it's not certified. It's not certified for that. So that's something, it's really not going to affect us in Merced County. I know that's the way we've always interpreted that. So other significant EPA changes that aren't impacting California. So there's a deletion of grace period that the rest of the country is going to have to worry about. Some revised closed system requirements and the requirement for respiratory protection program to be consistent with OSHA standards. And the reason why that doesn't affect us is because years ago we went through those regulations where we kind of upgraded our respirator regulations to fit with what OSHA is requiring. And so you guys are ahead of the game on that one. Again, this is going to be taking place the first round in 2017. Most of the training stuff will be taking place in 2018. They're going to provide some trainings to us at the county, a little bit more training than what we already got. And then if you have any questions about this, you can go to the DPR website and go to that quick links page. Right by the other link I was talking about, there is a recently proposed or adopted regulations that you can click on. And that's it. And sorry that last part got a little dry there, but it's something you guys should know about. Look for those regulations coming out in 2017. If you have any questions, please contact our department. We're happy to work with you and get you guys all prepared for that. Any questions?
Going back to looking at the complaints of exposure in schools, do you have any information on some details of those complaints, for instance, where they determined that the exposure came from?
Well, again, in Merced County, we've had virtually none.